On this episode of Locked On Canadiens and Locked On NHL Prospects, is the Michael Hage hype real?
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to this crossover episode of Locked On NHL Prospects and Locked On Canadiens. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, for subscribing on YouTube and wherever you subscribe to your podcast. Doing that supports the show and ensures you don't miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. I am Ian Boisvert, and I'm joined as always on Locked On Canadiens by the incomparable Laura Saba. And today we are crossing over with the dynamic duo of Hage and Sebastian High, your hosts of Locked On NHL Prospects. How are we feeling today? We got off camera. We got into some Nail Yakupov chat, so I can already tell today's episode is going to be exactly what our listeners want. How you guys feeling today?
Doing great.
Good stuff.
Same here, absolutely. Well, just woke up, but you know.
No, I think Laura also took a nap right before this. I woke up about an hour ago. We're all in the best shape of our lives. It's really good stuff.
Weekend vibes, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Well, we have a lot coming up on today's episode. We wanted to check in on Michael Hage because obviously he's tearing things up in the NCAA right now. We want to talk about how systems potentially would play into scouting and drafting. And then, very selfishly, I want to pick Hattie and Sebastian's brains on how their scouting careers unfolded. Maybe talk about some guys they liked way back in the day when they first started doing this. But let's start with the guy Montreal Canadiens fans are pretty excited about. No, not Ivan Demidov. We'll get to him in a moment. But Michael Hage, he just scored another overtime winner on Friday night. This guy it seems like he cannot stop scoring in the NCAA, which is really, really great for a kid that we know went through a lot last year. And it seems like and you guys mentioned it on your show that the 21st pick seemed pretty low. It seems like he's on a mission to prove that that's true. What do you guys think of his start so far this year outside of the scoring? Like, what are you seeing in his game?
Outside the score, what I'm seeing with Michael Hage is a lot more projectable habits in his game than we saw most of last season in the USHL. He's been a lot more middle driven. I think he's been leveraging his pace and mobility a lot better. That's one of the big critiques early on in his draft year last year was that there was so much skill here, but the pace was very inconsistent. He could be floating around the ice pretty regularly. And so far this season with the University of Michigan, he's been flying around the ice. And his skating is a separating tool even at this level and has made the transition a lot smoother than it is for most prospects. And through 6 games, he has 4 goals and 7 points. That is a pretty good start to your college career.
Yeah, and that's without the last game that he played against the NTDP, which the fact that game went to overtime, like this year's NTDP is not good. So it was a relatively dull game for Hage, and he still managed to score the overtime winner, and it was a beauty, right? Like I think the main thing with Hage is how does he connect plays at the next level? How does he leverage his pace, like Sebastian said, but especially like get to the middle. Right, like that's where he's going to be the most lethal because his shot's really good, his passing's really good. If he can get to the middle consistently, if he can connect plays, one-touch plays, give and goes, and that's what really progressed last year. Like Michael Hage was on a steep development curve last year. The first half of the season and second half of the season were completely different, right? So, the fact that he's on the steep progression curve, that he hit the ground running in the NCAA. There's a lot of not concern, but hesitation or doubt around whether or not he'd be able to just, would he be a top line center playing, over a point a game? Would he struggle to adapt early on and kind of be a late bloomer? There was no one really knew what was going to happen with Hage in the NCAA, right? So the fact that he's hit the ground running, went from the second line to the first line basically instantly, and is now a mainstay on their top line and their top producer. Like for me, that's great news for Hage.
Yeah. I know, on the episode that you guys recorded last week where you talked about Hage, you mentioned, he's 6'1", 190. He doesn't use his frame much. Is that a limiting factor in the potential impact he can have in the NHL, or is it something that he can sort of play around? Is it something that isn't necessarily a big part of his game?
Well, I don't think it's going to be much of a concern. Like, there's a lot of players in this kind of mold that don't necessarily win most of their battles, or are really impactful on forechecks, or that kind of stuff. He just a lot about stick work when it comes to off puck play. Like he's he's really kind of using his stick to disrupt plays. He's anticipating, predicting plays. You've got some of those players in the NHL. Like look at Jake Evans, for example.
Yeah.
Jake Evans isn't a physical monster. He's not going to go into corners and win battles on his own. You've got the Yoel Armia prototype here. That's all he does. And then you have Jake Evans, who uses his brain, uses his processing, uses his stick to win battles. So, not saying Hage is on either of those levels, right? Like his skill level high already, but just to give an idea of like you don't necessarily need it to succeed. It's obviously better to have it. You look at Austin Matthews, for example. He's one of the best puck winners in the NHL. That's actually what makes him so effective offensively. Whereas Hage, I don't think will be able to reach a level where he's a top end physical guy. I think he's still going to improve over the next couple of years as he gets used to defenders in the NCAA.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, like as a whole, he's a very cerebral player. This is a guy who I really appreciate how he ticks and how he thinks the game, both on and off puck, on the defensive side of the puck, and offensively, obviously too. And as Hattie mentions, he's very proactive with his stick work. He anticipates play really well. He's able to like shepherd play into really uncomfortable spaces, and that's kind of where I like him the most in terms of like leveraging his tools like on the forecheck or in the neutral zone defensively, is in terms of shepherding play really well, because he is such a great skater. He's able to be really quite like precise with where he kind of forces play to go, and he's becoming a lot more thoughtful with how he's doing that this season in the NCAA. Whereas last year he could kind of just like chase play around a little bit because he can outskate his opponents, so he would just try to chase them. But there's a lot more thought behind what he's trying to do on that side of the puck this year. But yeah, and on the offensive side of the things, in terms of physicality, this is a guy who has like significantly plus level skating, like a really, really, really good shot, plus level playmaking ability, really, really slick puck handler. All those tools work in tandem nicely. Like he's able to layer them really smoothly. And as Hattie mentioned earlier as well, he's been able to get to the middle a bit more often as well this season at the college level. And I think if he's able to do those things in the middle of the ice, if he lacks that physicality, it's not really impacting his offensive output too much. It'll be another adjustment, certainly when he goes to pro hockey and the NHL eventually. But this is a guy who I think has all the tools to compensate. And physically, he's not like way below average, right? Like he still has a decent enough frame, and he has good skating mechanics and good leverage mechanics that come with that. So he's able to outmaneuver opponents as well along the boards. An overall player that I have a lot of time and appreciation for.
When I look at Michael Hage, I look at him as a player. You know, those players that we sometimes watch in the NHL, and then like our comment is the controllers got disconnected. Like I feel like his controller never gets disconnected. Like that's the way I look at him. But you did talk about projectable elements a little bit earlier, Sebastian. So my question to you guys is this. Between now and his pro career, which we hope will be with the Montreal Canadiens and long and successful, what adjustments do you think he needs to continue to make to his game? Or what things do you think he needs to work on in order to be a successful pro player?
It's all about turning flashes into consistent elements, right? Like with Hage, he's not necessarily a physical player, but if you're not going to be a physical player, you got to add puck protection mechanics. You have to be able to, put out your knee when someone's stick checking you to protect the puck, or get your hand across, that kind of stuff. Just getting more used to that kind of stuff. And that's one of the things that in every single video I watch of Adam Nicholas, he zeroes in on that, right? So I'm not really worried about that progressing. I think that he's in a great environment to add that to his skill set, and also just learning how to use that speed a bit better, right? Like being able to decelerate, accelerate, use his kind of use momentum, use kind of those changes of speed in order to create offensively is going to be really useful, and using cutbacks more often. Like Hage is very much used to bombing down the flanks, bombing down the boards, using timely cutbacks in the offensive zone to let his teammates kind of join the attack and find secondary passing lanes. I think is going to be the next learning development for him. But overall, skill set wise, tools wise, I don't see much. It's just about habits, decision making, those kinds of stuff that need to come a couple ways. And again, like Adam Nicholas is pretty much the best guy to develop those things.
And again, his progression curve is steeply upwards, and he's been integrating a lot of like really good habits in his game in the past 6 months, in the last year. Like if you go back and watch him play early on last year with Chicago, you do not recognize the player you see today. It has like shifted significantly, and yeah, there's a lot to be excited for here.
Awesome. No, it's great. It's great having that feedback from you guys. I know our listeners will find that all very helpful. We're all very much in Michael Hage hype train mode. So very nice to have you guys give your feedback on him. But we got to move on to our next segment. Up next, we're going to get into the finer details of scouting players, especially including how systems may play a role in how a player is perceived. And we'll get into all that in just a minute. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. It's so fun and simple to use, you'll really enjoy playing. Download PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNHL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, we are back with this Locked On Canadiens, Locked On NHL Prospects crossover. It was a long time coming. I'm super glad we were able to find the time to meet with you guys, especially at a very interesting time for the Montreal Canadiens where, we're sort of at a stage where they're expected to show some kind of results on the ice, but not at the cost of abandoning the process. And that's sort of what we're seeing. Marty is starting to go a little more defiant in the media. He's being pressed about his defensive system. They play the hybrid system, which the quick crash course on that is they play man up high and they play zone down low. And it's obviously for young defensemen very difficult to learn right away. They're having a hard time adapting. Marty was asked essentially, what if you don't have the players for this system? To which Marty responded, too bad, so sad. We're playing this system. This is where the league is going. I guess where I'm headed here is, the NFL, when you draft players, especially defensive players into the NFL, you're looking at scheme fit, right? When you're looking at a corner or a safety, you're looking, hey, can they play man? Can they play zone? How do they play press? Like, how do they play all those things? If they don't fit into our system, even if they're a good player, we might not take them. Is that something that, that scouting folks will look at with regards to where players are picked or player fit? If a guy, doesn't play the same forecheck that, say the Montreal Canadiens play, is it worth taking a flyer on that kind of player, even though he might be a little bit harder to teach to get him to fit into the role that he's going to be on that team?
I would say that one big difference is that in the NHL draft, you're drafting 17 or 18-year-old kids, right? Sure. In most other sports, you're drafting players that are finished with college rather than going into it the upcoming year. So that plays a big role as well of like, there's a lot more molding to be done after drafting a player in hockey than, for instance, in football. That said, it does still play a role, right? Like there are certain players that just excel in man coverage or excel in zone defending, and who come up through development systems in the minors or over in Europe, especially as well, where they really fine tune specific aspects of their game and like really excel in specific systems. So it does play a role, but there's a lot more flexibility with how you want to interpret that, right? Like, are you going to see a player that excels in that situation and think, oh, he's going to have to be that in the NHL? Or do you think, oh, he's already learned this complex system at the age of 17. He can learn our complex system as well in 2, 3, 4 years' time. So it plays a role, but I don't think it's quite as impactful as it is in football, for instance.
In terms of how it applies to the Habs, what I find interesting there is you have a dilemma there. Like, when you're playing a certain system, which your young defenders aren't used to, you have two choices. You either change the system or you let the players adapt. When you change the system around your players, yes, you're playing to their strengths and you're going to win more games, but you're preventing them from developing because they're doing things they are already good at, right? Like if you put Lane Hudson in a system where he plays man down low, that actually fits him better than his own system because Hudson's really good at covering his man, sticking to players, identifying rotations, that kind of stuff he's good at. His challenge is going to be, how do I learn to play zone? How do I learn to move into the right shooting lanes instead of sticking to the right players? That benefits his development. So I always say with the Habs are built to learn. They're not built to win, right? Like this is a team that isn't a contender at all right now. Even with Laine healthy, even with Slafkovsky healthy, even with Goulet healthy, this isn't a contending team. So I think the expectations were set really high on this year's edition of the Habs, mainly because of that Laine addition. But make no mistake, like the average age of the Habs blue line right now with David Savard is 24. Like this is a young defense, and there's going to be an adaptation period, and it's going to take a while. It's just about patience right now, letting these guys develop. And I think the best way to do that is to put them in uncomfortable situations and letting them learn how to play the Habs system instead of catering the Habs system to their pre-existing strengths. Because that'll it won't stall their development, but it's certainly not going to help.
I think it's a really interesting perspective and something that we kind of all need to remember because there is a lot of hand-wringing, obviously, every time they lose a game, and it's not fun. It's really not fun to watch a team that gets hemmed in their own zone for 6-minute stretches on end. But I do kind of admire like Marty's stubbornness. Like they're going to figure it out. Like they have no choice. They have to figure it out. Right. Which I think is fair because a lot of times like that's where you get your gems, right? Like somebody maybe you might not have expected to develop in a certain way. Like they end up being a lot better than you expected. And then sometimes people just get left behind. But I think like from a viewer perspective, it's so frustrating that we're just like, Marty doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah. Of course, and I mean, like the fact that you have only 2 Habs players that are over 50% expected goals for on ice at 5-on-5 so far this season goes a long way to kind of tell that story too. And those 2 guys are Michael Pezzetta with 75% in 16 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time, and Christian Dvorak. So it's been that kind of year so far. I think also Lane Hudson's 8th on the team, and he's at 38% or something ugly like that.
Yeah, it's felt that way. I was at the Islander game where they got hemmed in their own zone for 6 minutes. It was right in front of me. I'm still kind of baffled that happened on an NHL ice surface. I've never seen anything like that in my entire life. Laura, before we jump into our next segment, I know you wanted to talk about Ivan Demidov really quick.
Yes, because we do have just a bit of an update from Hattie, because I know Hattie keeps an eye on the KHL for us. And just what's going on there. People are wringing their hands again. There's a lot of the Canadiens we're planning to meet with him, and then they're just following that plan, and now people are they going to bring him over? What's going on there?
They can't bring him over. That's number one. But in terms of how it's going for him, he's got 16 points in 20 games now. He's on a roll recently. He's got 8 points in his last 5. Yes, 4 of them came against Kunlun Red Star, which is not the best of teams, and that's kind of a testament to what's going on in the K, right? I mean, it's very top heavy across the board in Russia. But Demidov's doing really well with the ice time he's being allocated. He's getting the KHL treatment, especially the SKA treatment. We know how it is. I think the Habs expected this heading into this year. But he's doing very, very good with the ice time that he has. And when the team has been playing kind of lower end competition, he's been pushed up to the third, sometimes even second line on shifts. But this is usual for young Russian players. I don't think Demidov's stalling development wise. He's still learning things, still learning how to leverage his hands in better ways, kind of understanding how pros defend and kind of getting used to that. So I'm not too worried. At times he's facing top pairs, even if it's for 30 seconds a shift, 30 seconds a game. Like it doesn't matter. He's still learning in those situations.
Yeah, and I'll also add there, the last game he played was against Spartak Moscow, and he played 16 minutes and 8 seconds of time on ice, which is by far his most this season. And considering that just about, week and a half ago, he was perpetually playing 3 to 5 minutes a night, he's definitely been benefiting from the return of Evgeny Kuznetsov and also getting increased trust playing alongside him and increased minutes, and he had 7 shots on goal in that game with an assist as well. So he's been playing some really good hockey, and this is a guy that I think both me and Hattie are still pretty confident in terms of being a really special talent.
Yeah, we had him second overall in last year's
all year.
draft. So.
There
was no doubt at all.
He and Celebrini were equally entrenched in their respective positions.
Not bad for a guy who skates like a baby giraffe, right, Hattie?
Listen, it's funny to watch, but it works. He makes it work.
Does.
So
you can't argue with the result, right? You can look at it and say that looks goofy, but the guy can play. Like, what do you want?
Yep.
All right, cool. Well, we're gonna head into our last segment where we're just gonna pick Hattie and Sebastian's brain to see how they got to where they are in the scouting world, any advice they could give to an aspiring NHL scout. And we'll get into all that in just a minute. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, heading into our final segment. I think part of being on shows like this is that we can, give the outside public a look at how people get into roles like these. I'll be honest, I shouldn't be here, following the traditional media path. I didn't do that, and I got here. We just had Kay on from last week on from Game Over. She didn't follow that, and look where she is. So I think it's important to take time to talk with people who got into these roles in non-traditional ways. I always remember Jeff Merrick. He would always be asked, how do you break into hockey media? And his answer was always start a blog, start a podcast. And the right people will find it. The right people will see it. You'll always end up in the right place. So let's start. I'll start with Sebastian. How did you end up, getting into scouting? What path did you follow to get to where you guys are now? Because you guys are not only doing this show, but you're writers and scouts for Elite Prospects, which is one of the most universally respected scouting organizations in the world. So how do you end up going from where you were to where you are?
I started writing on a blog, shockingly.
There you go.
There you go. 1
point for Jeff Merrick. He did it.
1 point for Jeff Merrick on that one. I started writing with thewinninghabit.com like 5-6 years ago. And from that point, just kind of found my niche in terms of what I enjoyed writing about as prospects, and always got very excited around the draft season, and that kind of just snowballed into me wanting to do my own research and watching the players and reading the Elite Prospects Draft Guide, watching Will Scouch's YouTube videos, and just trying to get access to all like the content I could about the draft to learn more about what was going on, what players are coming into the league. And then like around like 2020, I started like with the pandemic, I had a lot more free time on my hands and just started like watching a lot of game tape and started scouting independently. And about a year after, or I had one season of just scouting independently fully, which meant a lot of 3-hour-long on hockey viewings for me that year, which was a slog and a half, but more than worthwhile. That was the Lane Hudson draft. And I mean, I had him ranked pretty high as well there at 11th overall. I've always been a very big fan of that player. And yeah, and then at the end of that draft year, I joined Dobber Prospects as the OHL scout for the following draft in 2023. And then there was just some like shakeups in the organization of like higher ups needing to step back for professional or family reasons, and got bolted up into a director position at Dobber Prospects. Immediately brought Hage to help me along because I knew I couldn't do it on my own. And we've been collaborators ever since. And then this summer made the leap together to Elite Prospects. And yeah, it's been a blast. Started the podcast, or Hattie started the podcast like almost 2 years ago now. And I joined last June. And yeah, it's been a blast. But definitely podcasting and writing, I think, are two central pieces in terms of trying to gain a foothold and just watch hockey. Enjoy watching hockey. I think that's kind of what it goes down to as well. Like you kind of can get back what you put into it much of the time. And yeah, I think that writing and talking about it is certainly a good way of getting a foothold in this industry.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, watching hockey and enjoying it, if you know, I think that goes a long way in it, right? I mean, we wouldn't be doing any of this if we all thought it was miserable. If we hated doing it, right? Like we enjoy this sport, we enjoy watching certain players. Hattie, how about you? How did you end up? What sparked you to start this journey, and how did you end up where you are?
Well, my journey mainly started during the pandemic. I found myself kind of whittling away at a day job that I absolutely hated, and I thought, I need to change things up. I want to do something different. And my whole life, I've been watching hockey and realizing that like the people who watch it with me, whether it's friends or family, just they don't understand what I'm seeing, right? So I thought I need to pursue this. Like this is something I'm really good at. So I started harassing Dobber Prospects employees until they got me a job, and started off as the New Jersey Devil writer for the for Dobber Prospects. Then very quickly became the QMJHL scout for the Dobber Prospect scouting team, and then got promoted with Sebastian to director. And yeah, that progression was really interesting. And all along the way, I realized like I can sit down and watch 4 or 5 hockey games in one night and not be bored, not be bothered, even though it's pardon me the expression, crappy MHL hockey. I'm still enjoying it, right? So I thought, if I love hockey this much, I need to keep pushing. I started putting out YouTube videos, which were a drag. It wasn't easy.
Yeah.
They're not easy to make. I'm not a really good editor, but got good at it. And that's kind of I think it was a tipping point to getting to Elite Prospects, was those YouTube videos, was my video analysis. And yeah, I think that when you're good at something, the best thing to do is to add tools around it to make you even better at it. It's the same as with scouting, right? Like a lot of the things that got me into this industry are the same things that get kids into the NHL, which is taking what you're good at, refining that while adding things around that make it even better. So that's been the main kind of progression for me. And yeah, I'm super happy to be here. I had like starting into this when I was making my 5-year plan 5 years ago when I started this, I had like working at EP as like my final step of the 5-year kind of motivation program that I built for myself. And I mean, I'm here now.
Manifesting, we're doing it.
Yep, absolutely.
It worked. The system works. No, it's really great to hear that perspective from you guys, and you guys work really hard to get to where you are. So it definitely plays, like we see it. We see the work that you guys put in. The things that you guys write are mandatory viewing, mandatory reading, especially because you guys, maybe implicitly have a more finer view on the Montreal Canadiens, right? Like I see you guys as, you're always keyed in on this team. So as far as Locked On Canadiens goes, you guys are also Locked On Canadiens. You are right there. You guys are doing this with us.
I like to go to them, like we have a little group chat, and I like to go to them when there's like some serious issues that I need to ask their opinions about, because sometimes I don't know. And I think the first real one where I didn't like their answer was when we talked about the chances of getting Demidov, and they said 1 in 4.
Yeah.
And that was like the first time where I was like, you guys are not on my side, but it ended up working out for the Habs. So.
To be fair, I should have seen it coming. Like Anaheim really wanted a right shot forward forward, and the
Yeah.
only one available was like Beckett, Seneca in that range.
Right.
Chicago was zeroed in on my goodness, Artem Levshinov. And then at number 4, you look at Columbus's makeup, and I don't think they wanted an undersized forward, or quote unquote undersized. They wanted.
And they would really, really want a guy like Caden Lindstrom.
Exactly. So honestly, I should have seen it coming. The odds were higher than 1 in 4, but I'm really glad it worked out the way it was. It's just that's a testament to how high we were on Demidov. Like he was closer to 1 than to 3 for us. So
Yes.
That's great. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode. A piece of programming note for Locked On Canadiens, we'll cover off on our weekly recap and weekly forecast on the Tuesday episode. We'll also prep you for the Canadiens' next game in that one.
And we'll do our trivia then as well.
Yes, we are postponing our trivia for this episode. So see that on your Tuesday episode. But that's going to do it for us on this one, on this crossover episode of Locked On Canadiens and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you so much for tuning in and making this your first listen of the day. As a reminder, we are free and available everywhere you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So be sure to subscribe to Locked On Canadiens and Locked On NHL Prospects so you don't miss an episode. For your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey, become a fantasy hockey expert, and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. As a reminder, we are free and available everywhere you get your podcasts. You can follow Hattie on Twitter at HattieK Scouting. You can follow Sebastian at @high_Sebastian. You can find their show on Twitter at LO_NHL Prospects. You can find Laura at The Active Sick. You can find me at Maybe It's Ian. You can follow our show, Locked On Canadiens, on Twitter at LO_Canadiens, or email us at lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you tomorrow.